I ignored the signs for a long time, far longer than I should have, and longer than I will ever be comfortable admitting. Not because I could not see them, but because I did not want to understand what they were quietly trying to tell me. There is a difference between noticing something and accepting it as truth, and I stayed in that space between those two things, where everything can still feel normal if you choose not to examine it too closely or ask the questions that matter. It started slowly, the way these things always seem to begin, not with something dramatic or undeniable, but with small changes that did not feel important enough to question. Changes that could easily be explained if you wanted them to be. He started placing his phone face down on the table more often than before, not every single time, just enough for me to notice the shift. And when I asked, he laughed it off in a way that made me feel foolish. He said it was just a habit, something he had picked up without thinking about it, and I accepted that explanation without pushing further, because it was easier to believe that than to ask why the habit had suddenly appeared. There were other things too, small and easy to dismiss, like the way he would take certain calls in another room, lowering his voice just enough to make the conversation feel private in a way it had never been before. I told myself that everyone needs space sometimes, that privacy is normal, and that I was overthinking something that did not deserve that level of attention. Repeating those thoughts until they began to feel like facts instead of excuses. He began coming home later than usual on certain days, always with a reasonable explanation, always with just enough detail to make the story believable. And I never questioned those details because questioning them would mean I already suspected something. I did not want to be the kind of person who doubts without proof, who creates problems out of nothing. So I convinced myself that trust meant not asking too many questions, even when something inside me felt unsettled. The distance between us did not arrive suddenly. It grew quietly, almost invisibly, through shorter conversations, less eye contact, and the absence of small things that once felt natural. But even then I told myself this was normal. I told myself that relationships change over time, that routines replace excitement, that comfort sometimes looks like distance. And I accepted all of those explanations because they allowed me to avoid a more uncomfortable possibility. There were moments when something inside me shifted. A quiet discomfort that I could not fully explain. A feeling that something was slightly out of place, like a detail in a familiar room that suddenly does not belong. I remember one evening when he was standing in the kitchen, looking at his phone with a smile that felt unfamiliar, not directed at me, not connected to anything we shared, but something separate, something I was not part of. I asked him who he was talking to, keeping my voice casual, and he said it was just a friend. A simple answer that should have been enough, and I nodded as if I believed it completely. But even as I nodded, something inside me resisted that answer, not loudly, not in a way that demanded attention, but quietly, persistently, like a thought that refuses to disappear no matter how many times you ignore it. Still, I chose to ignore it, telling myself that doubt without evidence is just insecurity, and that I needed to trust him if I wanted the relationship to work the way it was supposed to. Trust became the word I used to silence my instincts, the explanation I leaned on whenever something felt wrong. And over time I stopped questioning things that would have once stood out clearly. The signs did not disappear. They became more frequent, more noticeable, but I adapted to them, adjusting my expectations so that what once felt strange slowly began to feel normal in a way that was deeply uncomfortable. That is what people do when they are not ready to face the truth. They reshape their understanding of reality so that it fits the version of life they want to believe in, even when it no longer matches what they feel. There were changes in the way he looked at me, or more accurately, in the way he stopped looking at me, as if I had become something familiar and unremarkable, always present, but no longer worthy of attention. I noticed it, of course I did, but I did not say anything about it, because saying it out loud would force me to acknowledge what it might mean, and I was not ready to do that. Nights became quieter, conversations became predictable, and everything between us settled into a routine that felt more like coexistence than connection. But even then I stayed, telling myself that this was just a phase. Leaving requires certainty, and I did not have certainty. I only had feelings, and feelings are easy to dismiss, especially when you are afraid of what they might lead to if you take them seriously. Then came the moment that changed everything, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was something I could not explain away, something that did not fit into any of the excuses I had been using. It was a small detail, something that might not have meant anything on its own. But in that moment it connected to everything else I had been ignoring, and suddenly all the pieces began to form a clear picture. For the first time, I did not look away from what I was seeing. I did not create an explanation. I did not give him the benefit of the doubt. I simply allowed the moment to exist without interference. And in that moment, everything became clear, not slowly, not gently, but all at once, as if every sign I had ignored was suddenly demanding to be acknowledged at the same time. There was no confusion left, no uncertainty, no space for doubt, just a quiet, undeniable understanding of what had been happening and of what I had been refusing to see. I did not react the way people might expect. I did not cry or confront him immediately, because the emotional part of this had been building for a long time, long before this moment made it real. What I felt instead was a strange kind of calm, the kind that comes when uncertainty is replaced by truth, even if that truth is painful and changes everything you thought you knew about your life. I realized then that the signs had always been enough, that I had known in ways I could not fully explain, and that the problem had never been a lack of evidence but a lack of willingness to accept it. That realization was difficult, not because of what he had done, but because of what I had allowed myself to ignore. The way I had dismissed my own instincts in favor of maintaining a version of reality that no longer existed. Once I saw it clearly, I could not return to the version of life I had been living. I could not pretend that everything was fine, because the space between knowing and accepting had finally disappeared. What remained was a choice, not an easy one, but a clear one. A decision about what I would do with the truth now that I could no longer deny it or push it aside. That moment, the one after clarity, is the one that defines everything. Because it is where you decide whether to stay in comfort or move forward into something uncertain but honest. I did not make the decision immediately, even though I already knew what the right choice was. Because knowing something and acting on it are two very different things that require different kinds of courage. I sat with the truth longer than I expected, not because I was confused, but because I understood what acting on it would change, and I needed time to accept the full weight of that change. Letting go is not only about losing a person, it is about letting go of the future you believed in, the plans you made, the version of your life that felt certain and safe before everything shifted. I thought about the years we had spent together, the routines we had built, the small habits that once felt meaningful, and I realized how much of it had already started to disappear long before I acknowledged it. The truth did not arrive suddenly. It had been slowly forming in the background of my life, waiting for the moment when I would finally stop ignoring it and allow it to become real. I've paid attention to everything after that. Not in a suspicious way, but in a clear and honest way. Noticing patterns that had once felt harmless now revealing themselves as something entirely different. The way he spoke, the way he avoided certain topics, the way his attention shifted. All of it became easier to understand once I stopped trying to protect a version of reality that no longer existed. And with that understanding came a quiet sense of control, not over him or the situation, but over myself and the choices I was about to make moving forward. I did not feel anger in the way I thought I would, not loud or overwhelming, but something quieter, something more controlled, like a decision forming rather than an emotion taking over. That surprised me more than anything else. The absence of chaos in a moment that could have easily been defined by it. And I realized that clarity has a way of calming things down. When you finally understand something fully, you stop searching for explanations, you stop asking questions that no longer matter, and you start focusing on what needs to be done next. I began to think practically, not emotionally, considering the steps I would need to take, the conversations I would eventually have, and the changes that would follow once I acted on my decision. There was a strange strength in that process, in shifting from confusion to action, in moving from uncertainty to clarity. Even though the clarity itself was built on something painful and difficult to accept, I realized that I did not need to confront him immediately, that I did not need a dramatic moment to confirm what I already knew, because the truth had already been confirmed in quieter ways. Instead, I chose to prepare, to give myself time to think clearly, to make decisions that were not driven by emotion but by understanding. And that choice changed everything about how I moved forward. The more I allowed myself to accept the truth, the less power it had over me, and the more control I felt over my own life. Something I had not realized I was slowly losing before. I understood then that ignoring the signs had not protected me, It had only delayed the moment when I would have to face them, and in doing so, it had cost me time I could not get back. But I also understood that recognizing the truth, even late, still mattered, because it gave me the chance to choose differently, to act in a way that aligned with what I now knew. And that was the moment everything shifted. Not when I discovered the truth, but when I decided that I would no longer ignore it, no matter how uncomfortable it made things. Because once you reach that point, once you truly see things as they are, there is no going back to the version of yourself that was willing to look the other way and pretend everything was fine.